I see it almost every day. You want to play altissimo like this, but the only thing that comes out is a pregnant donkey noise like this. I get it, believe me, but here's the surprising thing. Practically nobody really knows what's going on with altissimo. All the educators telling you what to do, including me, just figured out how to do this for themselves. And now we're trying to describe what we do to help people like you get those altissimo notes out. But this is severely problematic. First, we can't see what's going on inside our body. So we end up trying to describe these invisible, subjective sensations that are going on inside our body. Then, once we tell you what to do, you can't see inside your body, we can't see inside your body, so really, nobody has a clue what's really going on. Secondly, as saxophone teachers, it's almost inevitable that we don't fully understand the acoustics of the saxophone enough to correlate subtle movements in our vocal tract with the sound that comes out of the horn. Why? Because this stuff is really bloody complicated and you literally need a degree in physics to understand it. And finally, even if we did fully understand what was going on inside our bodies and how those changes in our biology affect the physics and the sound coming out, we still have to fall back on analogies, metaphors, syllables to even give the average student half a chance of trying this for themselves. Now, I have no clue if this video is actually going to be of any use to you, but I am going to grab the thistle and with the help of some actual solid scientific research, I'm going to attempt to filter out the facts from the folklore and more importantly, give you a huge toolbox of things to try so that you can get into that third octave, that pesky altissimo range of the saxophone. So this is how it's going to work. First of all, we're going to look at all those common instructions that you're given to play altissimo. Then we're going to see if they're actually based on any evidence. After that, we're going to see what really happens when proficient players play altissimo inside here. And then based on all that stuff, I'm going to give you a laundry list of techniques to try to make sure that you can get your altissimo notes out. Sound good? All right, let's do it. Just before we get into this, I want to be crystal clear about something very important. And that is just because an instruction that an educator gives you isn't scientifically correct, it doesn't make it any less valuable. This is so important, I'm going to repeat that. Just because an instruction from an educator isn't scientifically correct doesn't make it any less valuable. I myself have given out countless scientifically incorrect statements over the years, and sometimes it just connects with a certain person and they get the result that they want. It's a very good chance that they're not even doing what I've told them to do, but whatever they're doing somehow gets the right result. So it's very, very important to note that things just don't have to be scientifically correct for them to work as an instruction. I must admit though, I do sometimes find myself saying things just because other people have said them, and I've never really stopped to question the logic or effectiveness of the instructions. And that's why I'm making today's video. I want you to question everything about altissimo and approach this with a completely clean slate. So much of the information that you're going to learn today is taken from this excellent book by Dr. Mark Watkins. It's called From the Inside Out, an in-depth resource for the development of saxophone sound. So I would highly encourage you to go and get yourself a copy, although full disclosure, it is a pretty heavy read. But just before we examine the received wisdom on instructions for creating altissimo, there's some interesting comments from Dr. Mark Watkins that we're going to open up with. So let's get into the slides. So just before we start dissecting some of the received wisdom on altissimo, Watkins makes an interesting note in his book, and he says, as we look at some of the published comments, keep in mind that these are highly accomplished professionals, but none that I'm aware of have had the opportunity to watch endoscope or X-ray images, and none have had the opportunity to study the acoustic principles of the vocal tract, not because of the effort or willingness, but because much of this information is recent. Most research and revelation on the subject is post-2000 and only available through discipline-specific journals, not in saxophone literature. So the take-home point is, there's a lot of information out there which is really relevant to this topic, but most people would never have had the opportunity to check it out until today, that is, folks. So let's get into it. So here are the 5 most common things that you will be taught if you want to get altissimo on saxophone, starting with number 1, blow with a faster airstream by arching the tongue like you're making an E vowel shape. So it's kind of like the first 2 are really one combined point. Number 3, manipulate the airstream in a particular direction. In other words, blow down, blow up, basically any instruction where you're told to blow in a certain direction. Number 4, increase embouchure pressure. And number 5, move your jaw forward. So what we're going to do now is examine these in turn and see if they're actually based on any evidence. Hey, while we're on the subject of altissimo, I have got some massive news from inside the inner circle, which is that we are super excited to have the one and only altissimo god himself, Lenny Pickett, join us on August the 30th, exclusively inside the inner circle membership. He's going to be spending 90 minutes with us. I've got a lot to ask him, and you could ask him anything you want as well if you're inside the inner circle. Imagine that. You get to hang out with Lenny Pickett and ask him anything you want. I mean, who knows more about altissimo than Lenny Pickett, right? So, great time to join the inner circle. The link is in the description. Now let's move on. So let's play a game of true or false, starting with the first instruction that you'll commonly get regarding altissimo technique, and that is to blow with a faster airstream. Now this is answered in a simple correspondence between Dr. Mark Watkins and Dr. Joe Wolfe from the University of New South Wales, who is one of the world's foremost experts on acoustics and wind instruments. Dr. Mark Watkins asked, does the airspeed need to be faster to play high notes? Is there a theoretical relation between the faster vibrating reed in the high register and the airspeed? Dr. Joe Wolfe's reply, no. So number 1 is false. Blowing with a faster airstream does not make the reed vibrate faster and give you higher notes. Moving on to number 2, which is kind of like the second part of 1 point, which is blow with a faster airstream by arching the tongue like an E vowel shape. You'll often be told to, arch your tongue like you're going E, and sometimes pin the sides of your tongue at the back. Now, the idea is this makes a narrow space in your mouth, and the same amount of air is squeezed through a narrower section in your mouth, thereby increasing the airspeed. That is the basic theory that most people, I think, would try and explain to you. Dr. Mark Watkins, a constriction in the vocal tract, in other words, raising your tongue, will speed up the air at the constriction, but the air will not continue to move at the sped up rate once past the constriction. There's a typo there, it says construction. In addition, due to the small mouthpiece tip opening, air will move fast at that point, regardless of what the vocal tract does. Now, sometimes you'll hear people talk about, putting your thumb over the end of a hose and the water comes out faster. Well, the problem with that is that in that analogy, the thumb that you're putting over the hose is the tip of the reed. So anything you do in the hose behind that will actually make no difference. So changing your tongue position to increase the airspeed will not work. But that's not to say it won't have any effect. But the assertion that you need to play with a faster airstream is false. Moving on to number 3, which is to blow in a certain direction, manipulate the airstream. You'll sometimes get these directions to blow up, blow down, blow across the reed, blow into the reed, away from the reed, whatever, all that sort of stuff. Here's the facts. The airstream will flow through the vocal tract to the mouthpiece tip opening, but one cannot control the angle or division of the vocal tract airstream. It fills the entire space. False. And if you think about it, of course you can't, branch off some of your airstream to go down under the reed or over the reed, or, you blow and it fills your whole mouth and then it goes into the tip opening. Again, this isn't to say that these instructions are going to have no effect, but you definitely cannot control the direction of the air as you're blowing. And finally, numbers 4 and 5, which are increase embouchure pressure and move the jaw forward, turns out to be true. And Watkins says most players move their jaw forward, another typo there, wrong spelling of there. Most players increase pressure on the reed to varying degrees. Now this was observed by his scientific experiments. So yeah, that is true. Increase of embouchure pressure and moving your jaw forward are true when you're playing altissimo. Let's now move on to the real facts about what actually happens when proficient players are playing altissimo, and we'll try and draw some conclusions from it. Now, as we work our way through this list, which is establishing exactly what is happening when proficient players play altissimo, you might be wondering, how do you know that? Well, the answer is that very clever scientists have established the fact using clever devices. For example, embouchure pressure, you can use a pressure sensor. Airspeed, you can use an anemometer inside the mouthpiece. You can put cameras down people's throats, that's called endoscopes. You can use fluoroscopy, which is like a live x-ray, and that is how we establish all this data. So it is pretty solid evidence, and it's all the stuff that we started off saying that you couldn't see inside, now you can. So it's pretty cool. Right, let's start with embouchure. And when proficient players go into the altissimo register, most of them increase embouchure pressure, but not biting. We're not talking about really clamping down, just a subtle increase in the embouchure pressure. And most players move their jaw forward. Okay, so that covers embouchure. Now let's talk about what's happening inside the mouth and with your tongue. So the front of the tongue moves closer to and even slightly underneath the reed, and the center of your tongue gets lower as you get higher up into the altissimo. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because the common instruction is to make that E sound, which is to raise your tongue in an effort to increase the airspeed. But what actually happens is your tongue lowers. It's the exact opposite, except on baritone. And finally, the soft palate, which is the shiny bit right at the back top of your mouth you can feel with your tongue, rises up and remains high, creating this great big gap between the tongue and the soft palate. So if your soft palate's at the top of your mouth, as you can see from the diagram there, the soft palate domes up. So if you look in a mirror and you say hung ah, you can see your soft palate rising up. Now, because your tongue lowers as well, if this was your soft palate and this is your tongue, the tongue goes down, the soft palate goes up, and there's this great big gap between the tongue and the soft palate, and you're about to see that for yourself. But just before we get into the actual footage, which is going to prove all this stuff, let's talk about what's happening in your throat, starting with your vocal folds. They are almost closed. They are very closely, they can't be completely closed because that would be a glottal stop and then no air would come through your neck. But they are what's called adducted, which is quite closely closed together. That creates a strong resonance in your throat, enabling you to play altissimo. And the space at the back of your throat, at the back of the oral cavity, is large. As we've already discovered, by the tongue going down, the soft palate rising up, and the space increases around the back of your throat. So it makes a big area. That is not what happens when you make an E vowel sound, so completely different. So we're about to look at actual footage, but here's a quick summary again. So embouchure, bit of extra pressure on your embouchure and a slight movement of the jaw forward. The front of your tongue moves as close as you possibly can to the tip of the reed, and maybe it even goes underneath the reed. The center of your tongue gets lower as the altissimo goes up, except on baritone. The soft palate rises up and remains up high, like this great big sort of cave at the back of your mouth, which is interesting. And inside your throat, those vocal folds, your glottis, are most of the time they're almost closed, although there is some variation. And the space at the back of your throat and in the oral cavity, that oropharynx is the posh name, that is increased and increases as you get higher up. So here are a couple of still photos. The first one, which you can see the palm key E, and then the altissimo C sharp, and we can highlight the differences between these two photos. So in the first diagram, the palm key E, you can see the red line is where the front of the tongue is, and the green line is where the top of the tongue is, the top of that hump of that tongue. And the purple line is the gap at the back of the throat. When you then go to the second photo, which is the Altissimo C sharp, you can see that the tongue is lower. The center of the tongue is lower. You can see that the dotted line was where it started. The green line is where it finishes for this Altissimo note. And the front of the tongue moves forward. Once again, you can see the red dotted line is where the front of the tongue used to be, and then it moves forward actually underneath the reed. And finally, at the back of the throat there, you can see that the purple arrow is the width at the back of your throat, which has increased. Let's now see this happening in real time, because I know that these photos, which are taken from the fluoroscopy images, are a bit kind of confusing. You can't really tell what's going on. It is very sort of shadowy and hard to figure out. So let's actually look at this happening in real time now. So we've recapped the common instructions that you get for Altissimo. We've examined them rigorously to see what holds up, what doesn't. We've then looked at the actual truth of what's happening inside there when the Altissimo happens. And now it's the most important moment of all, which is to give you a bunch of things to try. Some of them are based on actual fact and some of them aren't. And we're going to try them all and see if we can get you upstairs into that third register. Okay, like it says there, it's your turn now to try all this and see what happens. Remember, clean slate. Don't come to this with any preconceived ideas. So the first thing to try is to increase your embouchure pressure a bit. But don't really clamp and bite. You shouldn't need extreme pressure to get the Altissimo. It's just a little bit firmer. And try moving your jaw forward a bit so you're taking a little bit more of the reed into your mouth, basically. The third thing to try is to try this sensation of hollowing out your mouth. You've seen that actually the tongue goes down and your soft palate rises up and there's a big space at the back of your throat. So if you're not getting anywhere with your Altissimo so far, try doing the opposite of what you might have been taught. You might have been taught to kind of create a narrow gap in your mouth to speed the air up. Turns out it's the exact opposite. So this time try flattening everything down and doming everything up and try and make a great big cave inside your mouth, okay? That's why I say to hollow out your mouth. Fourth thing that you can try is to vary the wind pressure and air support in any way that you feel fit. So you can maybe think about using a bigger breath or blowing harder or seeing if you can support the air column a bit more. Just experiment and see if that makes any difference to you. Then try closing your vocal folds a bit, and I've put in brackets there stage whisper, because the way to kind of feel if your vocal cords are closed or not is with this stage whisper, like you know, like Miles Davis used to sound with his husky voice. It's kind of like a whisper. That is your vocal folds closing together, and if you can manage to do that voluntarily, like if you can click in here like a glottal stop, like that is your vocal folds closing. But you don't want to do it with any tension. You just want them gently closed. And see if you can experiment with your Altissimo. That is going to have the effect of creating a large amount of acoustic impedance inside your vocal tract, which is going to support those Altissimo notes. There's a bunch of science I'm not going to go into, but you can pick up all those details on my main Altissimo video, which I will link in the description. Now, if none of that stuff works, let's go back to the old instructions, which you started with. Try arching your tongue and doing an E vowel shape. Who knows? It might work. People wouldn't be saying it, you know, for all these years if it didn't work at all. Maybe it's going to make you do something which is going to give you access to those Altissimo notes. Also, try the old caveat of blowing down, blow up, blow through, blow to the side, I don't know. Blow in different directions at the reed and see if it changes anything there, which lets you access that third octave. And final thing that you can try, anybody who's really good at Altissimo will be able to do it on any setup, but it's still undeniable that setup matters. So try changing your setup. Now, if you want to get more Altissimo notes, you want to try a harder reed for a start. You want to try a mouthpiece with a baffle, which is that kind of step inside the mouthpiece. That is going to make Altissimo easier. And also try a wider tip opening. It's much easier to play Altissimo on a 6, 7 or 8 mouthpiece than it is on a 3 or 4. That's just how it is. You should be able to do it, but that's your final port of call, is to try changing your gear. So there are a bunch of things for you to try. Now, I've got my main Altissimo video that I mentioned. There's also a couple of other Altissimo videos which I will add in the description, which are going to help you point in the right direction in terms of exercises and all that kind of stuff. So that's it, my friends. That is Altissimo debunked and pulled apart from every conceivable direction to try and separate the fact from the fiction. I really hope it's been useful to you, and I really hope you find success with your Altissimo. Remember, like I mentioned, I've got a couple of other very important Altissimo videos that you definitely need to watch. They will be linked in the description. Now, all this stuff about sound and your vocal tract and how the getting inside the DNA of the saxophone is covered in great detail in my Total Tone Mastery program, which covers everything you can imagine about making a fantastic sound and mastering your saxophone. So I'll put a link in the description for Total Tone Mastery while I'm at it. Remember, you can always join my inner circle. There's always bonus content in there, as well as some more really exciting stuff. For example, we have coming up on August the 30th, only inside the inner circle, the one and only Lenny Pickett as our special guest, saxophone legend and Altissimo genius. So if you want to spend 90 minutes and get a question to and get the opportunity to ask Lenny anything you want, that's going to be happening live inside the inner circle on August the 30th, so do not miss that. All right, guys, until next week, make sure you practice hard, practice smart, and enjoy your music. Take it easy. Syllables, analogies, even to... You can't somehow magically divert some airstream. Coming!